Hello again, book lovers. Bertrand Russell, one of my favourite philosophers. His autobiography, which I'd been waiting a long time to read. Now, in these reviews, I've said before, I'm not going to review any books that I didn't like or wouldn't think were worth reading, but I can't honestly recommend this, except for real students of Bertrand Russell's life. It was a big disappointment to me. I was expecting some witty dinner table anecdotes, some psychological insights into how Bertie thought. Unfortunately, I found it rather tedious, and yes, I read all the 3 volumes. They're divided into chapters plus the letters pertaining to the period. The body of the work was dry as a bone, and the letters were even drier. By the 3rd volume I was skimming through, and also, sad but true, the more worthy it got, the more boring it got. All very well having campaigns for nuclear disarmament and world peace and etc. Great, do it, but it's just not very interesting to read about the internal squabbles. I'll very quickly give you an impression of the book, and then I'll use this video as an excuse to waffle on about Russell and autobiographies. Okay, let's start with this one. As a child, Russell was already thinking about weighty things, and what is true. This seems to have been a thing that weighed on his mind. Bertrand, as a youth, used to have imaginary conversations with Leibniz, just to give you some idea of where his head was at. Notwithstanding this cloud of philosophy following him around, he seems to be quite a popular chap. One of the things I wondered about this book is how on earth could he become such a famous person off the back of just being a philosopher from Cambridge University? I know we have public intellectuals and the like, but Russell's fame seems to have been exceptional. And on the back of what? Did people read his philosophy and thrill to it? Or was it his speeches? He seems to spend all his time doing speeches, like Winston Churchill. There's a funny thing. Russell wasn't mentioned once in the Churchill biography, and Churchill was mentioned in passing in Russell's autobiography, as he once gave a speech, as he says, in the style of Churchill. So there they are, completely missing each other over this huge period of the 20th century, despite both being born in England and both being the most world-renowned exponents of what they did. What did Russell do? Well, he did philosophy and, as I say, activism later on. He was inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment, as am I, that suggested that if you use reason to thrash things out rather than emotions, you'll probably be finding some kind of freedom. He seemed to like women a lot as well. He was married several times. He and his first wife Alice used thee and thou when talking to each other. Very much a hangover from the Victorian era, as we can see from their biblical sounding letters. While Patricia Spence, who he later married, was known as Peter, since her parents wanted a boy. Patricia on the birth certificate, but she was known as Peter. So, there you go. The book did not live up to my expectations. But I don't want to speak so badly of Bertie. I've loved a lot of his stuff. I'm broadly in line with his philosophical musings. I read a lot of him when I was studying philosophy at university. I used the history of Western philosophy as an encyclopedia, so I by no means read all of it. And he was the author of a couple of booklets that I really admired. Why I Am Not a Christian is an interesting read. In Praise of Idleness always gets people thinking. And there's one that I read and I just can't find it. Maybe I imagined it. There was one where Russell explained what the historical narrative said and what really happened, including Horatio at the bridge, as I remember. I thought it was called History as She Was Never Written, but I can't find it anywhere. Right then, unless you really love Bertie, I wouldn't read this. Do you want an autobiography? Okay, here are some of the ones that I've read that I thought were worth reading. Let's start with Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. It's always interesting to look at a historical figure that we all know from the outside and see it from the inside. Again, there's a little bit of bogging down in that book, I thought, with the machinations of the various African groups trying to get them all to be communists. But there are also some nice human touches. And little anecdotes that shed light onto things. Benvenuto Cellini's autobiography is famous because he was a pompous, puffed-up man, totally unself-aware, and so you can read it either at face value or as a kind of, as almost a psychoanalysis of the guy. Graham Chapman of Monty Python, Autobiography of a Liar, I thought was an excellent autobiography. Poor Mr. Chapman died young, and we are left with these memories of him. I was particularly interested in his friendship with Keith Moon and an incident in a certain Glasgow pub, but I'll leave you to discover that. Then there is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, of course, and his famous Confessions, which you can find in extra long version, or more abbreviated versions. They contain some jolly anecdotes. My favourites concerning throwing a stone at a tree and conducting his own ill-prepared music at a concert. And I really have to mention as well, while we're on the Confessions, forget St Augustine, go to the other end of the holy spectrum and go to Aleister Crowley. The celebrated occultist has a very amusing take on the world. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Of course it shall, Aleister. But this comes with stories about when he complained about the number of prostitutes in a small Scottish village, and the government sent somebody up to investigate, said we can't find any, and he said that's my complaint. And the book also contains the following line, which I quote from memory. Strange that Warwickshire should have given England her two finest lyric poets, as one must not forget Shakespeare. I also read Jung Chang's three-generational book, Wild Swans, so kind of biography and autobiography together. I don't remember any particular parts of that, but I do remember enjoying it and learning a lot about the China of those times. Boy by Roald Dahl I also enjoyed. Dahl is an easy writer to read, and he didn't suddenly become difficult when writing about himself. From that, I remember a phrase of his father that explained why they emigrated from Norway to Swansea. It wasn't Swansea particularly, it was Great Britain. His father said, how can such a small country be the rulers of the world? And that was what attracted him to go over there and see for himself, I suppose. And I should mention, of course, Laurie Lee's acclaimed 3-volume autobiography, beginning in his Gloucestershire village with Cider with Rosie. Then, as he walked out one midsummer morning, he went off to join the Reds in the Spanish Civil War. Again, these are very evocative and tell some very good stories very well. And just to finish off, a very broad sweep, a lot of George Orwell's stuff is autobiographical, albeit in a journalistic way. Homage to Catalonia is brilliant, tells of his experiences in the Spanish Civil War. The Road to Wigan Pier is also brilliant, talking about the lives of the miners and poor people in general in the north of England at the time. It's a great piece of investigative journalism, as is Down and Out in Paris and London, when he again adopts the persona of a beggar, a tramp, just to find out how they get treated, what life is like. And I have an outstanding recollection of the plongeurs in the restaurants of Paris of the time, and the scenes in the hostels for the poor, which were inevitably linked to a religious institution and where they literally had to pray for their food. Orwell certainly was not afraid of getting his hands dirty. Anyway, I love an autobiography. Russell's just wasn't for me.